Cowboy encounters three Apache women bathing in the creek, a stunning Western moment. The sun had just risen over the jagged peaks of the Arizona desert, spilling golden light across the dry, dusty landscape. The air was still, except for the soft whisper of wind moving through the sparse desert grass and the occasional rustle of a lizard darting under a rock. Caleb, a lone cowboy with years of experience on the trail, was already up. He had ridden long before sunrise, as he often did, preferring the quiet hours when the desert felt almost alive with its own secret rhythms. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Dusty, moved steadily beneath him, its hooves kicking up small clouds of sand and dry leaves. Caleb had always been a man who preferred solitude. Life on the trail could be harsh and unforgiving, but he had learned to embrace it. The open landscape, with its endless skies and rugged terrain, had a way of making a man feel both small and free at the same time. He had grown accustomed to the silence of the desert, the long stretches of sun-baked earth, and the occasional encounter with wildlife. Coyotes sometimes watched from a distance, rabbits scurried through the brush, and hawks circled high above. Each day brought new challenges, but also a strange, quiet beauty that city folk could never understand. Today, Caleb's journey had brought him to a narrow canyon where the land dropped sharply to a winding creek. The water sparkled under the sun, weaving its way through the rocks like a silver ribbon. In the middle of the desert, a creek was a treasure, a lifeline for animals and humans alike. Caleb had been following the trail of a small herd of cattle that had gone missing, and the creek was a logical place to check. He guided Dusty carefully down the rocky slope. Holding the reins loosely in his hands, the mare moved with careful balance, as though she knew every crevice and loose stone along the way. As he reached the creek, Caleb slowed, listening to the gentle trickle of water. It was a soothing sound, almost hypnotic, after days of riding through dry, barren land. He had been traveling for hours without seeing any sign of life, and the sight of flowing water brought a sense of relief. He scanned the creek, noting the clusters of reeds and willows along its banks. The shadows of the trees danced on the water, creating moving patterns of light and dark. It was a place that seemed untouched by human hands, a secret corner of the wilderness where nature ruled completely. Caleb dismounted from Dusty, patting her neck gently. She snorted and shook her mane, then bent down to drink from the cool creek. Caleb unstrapped his saddle and let it rest against a nearby rock. He took a deep breath, enjoying the earthy smell of wet soil and sun-warmed stone. It was rare to find a place like this, so far from towns or settlements. In moments like these, he felt a deep connection to the land, as if he were a small part of a much larger world that had existed long before him and would continue long after. As he rested, Caleb's eyes wandered along the banks of the creek. Something caught his attention, a flicker of movement near the reeds. He squinted, unsure if it was a shadow or an animal. His hand instinctively went to the small knife at his belt, not out of fear, but out of habit. Life in the desert had taught him to always be alert. Slowly he crept closer, keeping behind the rocks and trees. His heart beat a little faster, not from danger, but from curiosity. The creek was secluded, and the idea of discovering something unexpected thrilled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. The movement became clearer as he approached. Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. In a small clearing along the water's edge, 3 women were bathing in the creek. Their laughter was soft, melodic, blending with the gentle murmur of the water. Caleb could see the way the sunlight caught the droplets on their skin, creating tiny, sparkling rainbows in the air. They were entirely unaware of his presence, absorbed in their own world. Caleb felt a mix of awe and hesitation. He knew he had stumbled upon something private, something delicate and rare. It was not his place to intrude, yet he couldn't look away. For a long moment, Caleb simply watched, standing perfectly still. The women moved gracefully, their gestures natural and unguarded. It was a scene of quiet harmony between humans and nature, a moment that seemed almost suspended in time. Caleb reflected on his own life, the endless days on the trail, the loneliness, the constant struggle to survive. This scene was a stark contrast to his usual existence, a reminder of beauty and simplicity that often went unnoticed in the harsh world of the West. He considered turning away, but something kept him rooted in place. The sun continued to climb higher, casting a warm glow across the landscape. Dusty snorted again, breaking the silence, and Caleb gently reassured her with a soft word. He took a careful step back, making a mental note of the creek and its hidden clearing. Even if he left without interacting, this moment would stay with him forever. It was rare in his line of life to witness something so pure and untouched. Caleb's thoughts wandered to the women themselves. They carried themselves with a quiet strength and confidence, moving as if they were entirely at home in this wilderness. He wondered about their lives, their families, and the stories they carried with them. The desert could be harsh and unforgiving, yet these women seemed to belong here, connected to the land in ways that Caleb could only admire. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing, not for anything romantic or improper, but for the sense of freedom and belonging that they embodied. Time seemed to stretch in the heat of the day. Caleb did not move closer, nor did he speak. He simply observed, feeling the rare privilege of witnessing a private moment without disturbing it. The creek gurgled, the sunlight sparkled, and the women laughed softly, their voices mingling with the whisper of the wind. Caleb felt a deep respect for the scene before him. He realized that this encounter, brief as it might be, was a gift, a reminder of the beauty of life in the West, the connection between humans and the land, and the unexpected moments that made all the hardship worthwhile. Eventually, Caleb knew it was time to move on. He took one last careful glance at the creek, etching every detail into his memory. Dusty nickered softly, sensing that their brief rest was over. Caleb mounted her again, feeling the weight of the saddle and the familiar rhythm of her movements beneath him. As he rode away, he kept the clearing and the women in his mind, a private memory that no one else would know. It was a moment of beauty, a scene of harmony in the harshness of the desert, and a reminder that even in the wild, untamed world, there were still places of quiet grace. For the rest of the day, Caleb felt a lightness in his chest, a quiet joy that came from witnessing something so rare. The desert stretched endlessly around him, but now it felt a little less lonely, a little more alive. The creek and the women would stay with him, a private treasure he could revisit in his mind whenever the road felt long or the days felt hard. In the West, moments like these were precious, fleeting, and unforgettable. Caleb rode slowly along the creek, his horse stepping carefully over the uneven stones. The soft sound of water flowing beside him was calming, but his mind was racing. The image of the three women lingered in his thoughts. He had never expected to come across anyone so close to the heart of the desert, let alone in such an intimate and serene setting. Caleb had always known the West could be harsh and dangerous, but it could also be surprisingly beautiful, with moments of quiet grace hidden in places most would never see. As Dusty walked along the creek's edge, Caleb scanned the surroundings. The reeds swayed gently in the breeze, and the willows cast long, moving shadows over the water. Sunlight danced across the surface, creating bright, glittering patches that seemed almost magical. Caleb felt like he had stumbled into a hidden world, a place where time slowed and nature's beauty could be appreciated without interruption. The women had disappeared behind the trees, likely moving further along the creek, but their presence still filled the air. He dismounted again, wanting to get a closer look at the terrain. The rocks and sand near the creek made a soft crunch under his boots. Caleb carefully moved to a small rise overlooking a bend in the water. From there, he could see deeper into the creek's path without being noticed. His eyes were drawn to the play of sunlight and shadow, the gentle curves of the creek, and the tiny creatures that lived in and around the water. Dragonflies skimmed over the surface, and small fish darted in the shallow pools. Even the birds seemed calmer, their songs more delicate than usual. Caleb's curiosity was growing, but so was his respect. He reminded himself that this was not a place for intrusion. He could observe, appreciate, and leave without disturbing anything. The women, he realized, were part of this wilderness in a way he could never be. They belonged to the land, understood it, and moved with it in a natural rhythm. Watching them had been like catching a glimpse of something sacred, something rare and precious. Caleb felt a deep reverence for their presence. As he rested against a tree, he thought about his own life. Days spent on the trail were lonely, filled with the constant challenge of survival. Encounters with other humans were usually brief, practical, and often tense. A shared greeting here or a quick trade there were all he could expect. But this quiet moment of observation was entirely different. It was unspoken, unplanned, and yet profoundly human. Caleb realized that he had not felt such a connection in years. The desert, for all its challenges, had offered him a chance to witness life in its most natural form. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow, but he didn't leave his spot. He noticed small details in the environment, the way the wind shifted through the trees, the delicate ripple of the water, the shadows moving across the sand. Each detail added depth to the scene before him. He felt as if he had stepped into a painting, where every element was carefully placed to create a perfect moment of beauty. Then, something unexpected happened. A sudden rustle from the bushes made Caleb freeze. His heart beat faster, but not from fear. It was the same mixture of awe and caution he always felt on the trail. A deer burst from the undergrowth, bounding across the creek and disappearing into the desert beyond. The movement reminded Caleb that the wilderness was alive and unpredictable. Every step he took had to be careful, every decision measured. This encounter with nature and with the women was a delicate balance between observation and intrusion. Caleb took a deep breath and reminded himself of the lessons he had learned over the years. Life on the trail demanded patience, respect, and awareness. He had seen too many moments spoiled by thoughtlessness, by people who failed to notice the consequences of their actions. He would not make that mistake here. The women had trusted the creek to be a safe place, and it was his responsibility to honor that. He shifted slightly, making sure Dusty remained calm and quiet. The horse sensed his rider's caution and moved with gentle precision. As the day wore on, Caleb found a shaded spot beneath a large rock overhang. He sat there, letting his thoughts wander. He remembered stories from older cowboys about encounters with people in the wilderness, some peaceful, some tense, some even dangerous. He had always listened with interest, but now he understood them in a new way. These encounters were not just stories. They were lessons in respect, patience, and understanding. Caleb realized that his own encounter was not just a chance occurrence, but a test of character, an opportunity to show restraint and appreciation without overstepping boundaries. The creek itself seemed to change as the afternoon progressed. The sunlight became warmer and softer, casting a golden glow over the water. The reeds swayed gently and the willow's leaves whispered in the breeze. Caleb could hear the faint hum of insects, the occasional splash of a fish, and the rustle of leaves. Everything was alive, yet calm. It was a world where movement and stillness coexisted, where life continued in its natural rhythm without interference. Caleb felt honored to witness it. He thought again about the women, their laughter, their quiet movements, the way they seemed perfectly at ease in their surroundings. It was clear to him that they had a deep knowledge of the land, an understanding of its rhythms and secrets. Caleb could only imagine the skills and wisdom they carried, the ways they hunted, gathered, and lived in harmony with the desert. He felt a profound respect for their lives, realizing how little he truly knew about the people who had thrived in this land for generations before him. Hours passed and Caleb remained hidden, observing from a distance. He noticed the subtle changes in the water, the shadows stretching across the creek, and the tiny details in the woman's movements. Each moment seemed more meaningful than the last, as if he had stumbled into a story unfolding just for him. He realized that these quiet experiences were the ones that mattered most, the memories that would stay with him long after the trail had ended. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Caleb finally made a decision. He would not follow the women further, nor would he interfere in their private space. It was enough to have witnessed this moment, to have seen life in its natural, unguarded state. He felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet joy that came from respecting the balance of the world around him. This encounter would remain a memory he cherished, a reminder of the beauty and complexity of life in the West. Before leaving, Caleb took one last look at the creek. The water shimmered in the late afternoon sun, the reeds swayed gently, and the willows cast long, peaceful shadows. The women were gone, moving further along the creek, or perhaps returning to their village. Caleb smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the experience. He mounted Dusty once again, the horse stepping carefully over the rocks and sand. As they rode away, Caleb kept the image of the creek and the women in his mind, a secret treasure that would stay with him forever. Even as he followed the trail back into the open desert, Caleb felt a new sense of connection to the land and the people who lived in it. The encounter had reminded him of the importance of patience, respect, and observation. It had shown him that the West was not just a harsh, unforgiving place, but a land filled with beauty, wisdom, and moments of quiet magic. Caleb knew that he would carry this memory with him for the rest of his life, returning to it in his mind whenever the trail felt long, lonely, or difficult. By the time the sun dipped below the distant mountains, casting the desert in shades of orange and pink, Caleb had settled into a slow, steady rhythm. He rode with care, aware of every sound, every shadow, every movement around him. The day had been extraordinary, not for danger or adventure, but for the rare, fleeting beauty he had witnessed. The memory of the women, the creek, and the peaceful desert would remain with him, a reminder that even in the wildest places, life could be full of wonder, grace, and quiet moments worth treasuring. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the desert. Shadows stretched long across the sand and rock, turning the landscape into a tapestry of gold and bronze. Caleb guided Dusty along a narrow path parallel to the creek, careful not to make any sudden movements. Though he had seen the women earlier, he had not followed them directly. It was not his place to intrude. Yet, as he moved along the water's edge, he could not deny the pull of curiosity. Something about the quiet strength and grace of the women had stayed with him, lingering in his thoughts like a melody he could not forget. The creek twisted and turned, creating small pools and shallow rapids that reflected the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Caleb kept his distance, allowing the reeds and trees to obscure his presence. He had learned long ago that the desert was full of surprises, and he had no desire to startle anyone or anything. Yet his mind raced with questions. Who were the women? How did they live so freely in this harsh land? Their laughter and soft chatter had left an impression on him, a sense of life unburdened by the worries that so often consumed people on the trail. Caleb had spent years surviving, but he had rarely paused to appreciate the small, beautiful moments life could offer. As he moved carefully along the bank, Caleb remembered the stories his father had told him when he was a boy. Tales of explorers, settlers, and native tribes who had lived off the land for generations. Stories of danger, hardship, but also of incredible resilience and skill. His father had always emphasized respect. Respect for the land, for its people, and for its creatures. Caleb realized now that the lessons were more than just words. They were a guide for moments like this, when one witnessed life in its purest, most unguarded form. He paused near a shallow bend in the creek and crouched behind a large boulder. From this vantage point, he could see further along the waterway. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the creek. The gentle movement of the water whispered over rocks and fallen branches, a quiet song of the wilderness. Caleb's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. He sensed that something significant might happen here, a turning point that could not be predicted. He felt the same tension he often felt before a storm, an awareness that life could change in a single, fleeting moment. Suddenly, a faint splash caught his attention. Caleb froze, his eyes scanning the reeds and the water. A small fish had leaped from the creek, landing on a smooth rock before slipping back into the current. He allowed himself a quiet laugh, shaking off the tension for a moment. Yet the encounter earlier with the women remained vivid in his mind. Their laughter, the way they moved gracefully among the water and trees, and the unspoken strength they carried. These memories seemed almost magical now. Caleb realized that this part of the desert, hidden and quiet, had a life and rhythm all its own, one that he could only glimpse but never fully enter. As he continued along the bank, he noticed subtle signs of life around the creek. Animal tracks pressed into the damp sand, evidence of deer, rabbits, and other creatures moving through the area. Birds flitted through the trees, their calls echoing across the canyon walls. Even the insects seemed more active in the late afternoon warmth. Caleb felt the presence of the wilderness all around him, a living, breathing force that demanded attention and respect. Every rustle, every ripple in the water reminded him that he was a visitor in this place, a witness to something greater than himself. Caleb's thoughts turned once again to the women. He did not know their names, nor did he know if he would ever see them again. Yet the memory of their presence had left a mark on him. He found himself reflecting on the differences between his life and theirs. He had been raised to survive, to move constantly, to rely on skill and determination. They, on the other hand, seemed to thrive within the natural world, moving with it rather than against it. Caleb could sense a deep knowledge in their gestures, a quiet confidence born of understanding the land in ways he could only admire. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Caleb tensed, alert to every sound and movement. The desert could be unpredictable, and even the smallest sound could reveal a hidden presence. He glanced around carefully, noting the trees and rocks that could provide cover if needed. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing his caution, and he murmured softly to Dusty to keep her calm. Caleb realized that this moment was delicate. One wrong step, one careless movement could disturb the fragile balance of the scene he had discovered. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb noticed shadows growing longer, stretching across the creek in strange, shifting patterns. The sun's warmth softened into a gentle heat, and the air seemed almost still. He took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. Yet beneath that calm was a growing tension, an awareness that the women could appear at any time, that the moment could change without warning. Caleb felt a strange mixture of excitement and responsibility. He understood that witnessing this scene was a privilege, but it also required restraint and care. Then, without warning, a sudden movement among the reeds drew his attention. Caleb froze, his heart quickening. A pair of bright eyes emerged from the underbrush. One of the women, cautiously peeking around the plants. Their gaze met briefly, and in that instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Caleb held his breath, careful not to move or make a sound. He sensed that she had seen him, but rather than anger or fear, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that he meant no harm. It was a fleeting, delicate connection, one that spoke volumes without words. For a long moment, Caleb simply watched, feeling the weight of the encounter. The woman withdrew slowly, signaling to the others, who moved further into the trees and away from the creek. Caleb realized that this was a turning point, not in the dramatic sense, but in the emotional and personal sense. He had witnessed life as it was lived, in a state of freedom and harmony, and he had been acknowledged, however subtly, as an observer. It was a moment that demanded respect, reflection, and care. Caleb remained crouched behind the boulder, letting the tension settle. He thought about the choices he had made on the trail, the risks he had taken, and the many encounters he had witnessed over the years. Most were mundane, practical, and fleeting. This, however, was extraordinary. It was not about survival or danger or reward. It was about life itself, the quiet strength, resilience, and beauty of people living in harmony with the land. Caleb understood that this encounter, though brief, would stay with him forever. As the sun continued its descent, casting a warm, golden glow across the creek, Caleb decided it was time to step back. He did not want to push the moment further. He had seen enough to understand the significance, enough to carry the memory with him. Dusty snorted softly, sensing his rider's change in mood, and he patted her neck gently. Caleb allowed himself a small, private smile. He felt honored, humbled, and grateful for the rare glimpse into a world so different from his own. Before leaving, Caleb took one last careful look along the creek. The water shimmered in the fading sunlight, the reeds swayed gently, and the trees cast long, peaceful shadows. The women had disappeared into the distance, moving further along the creek, or perhaps returning to their homes. Caleb felt a quiet sense of completion. He had experienced a turning point, not a dramatic clash or confrontation, but a subtle, profound moment that reminded him of the beauty, balance, and complexity of life in the West. Mounting Dusty once more, Caleb moved slowly along the path, careful to respect the space he had entered. Every step was deliberate, every glance mindful. He carried with him not only the memory of the women, but the lessons of the land itself: patience, respect, awareness, and the quiet power of observation. The desert stretched endlessly around him, yet it no longer felt empty. It was alive with stories, life, and beauty, and he was now a part of that narrative, if only as a witness. By the time the sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the desert in shades of orange, pink, and purple, Caleb had settled into a steady rhythm. He rode with care, feeling the warmth of the evening air and the gentle rhythm of Dusty beneath him. The day had been extraordinary, not because of danger or discovery, but because of the rare, fleeting beauty he had witnessed. Caleb knew that this moment, and the subtle turning point it represented, would remain with him forever, a reminder of the quiet, profound wonders hidden within the untamed West. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the desert with shades of gold and amber, Caleb felt the quiet weight of the day pressing gently on him. The warmth of the afternoon still lingered in the air, though a cooler breeze whispered through the reeds and trees along the creek. Dusty's hooves made soft sounds on the sandy ground as they walked slowly along the bank, and the creek's gentle flow seemed to echo the rhythm of Caleb's thoughts. His mind kept returning to the women, to the laughter that had blended with the sound of the water, and to the fleeting look they had exchanged earlier. That moment, though brief, had left a deeper impression than he could have imagined. Caleb dismounted again, wanting to linger in the creek's quiet presence before the shadows grew too long. He tied Dusty to a low branch nearby, making sure she would not wander, and stepped closer to the water's edge. The creek shimmered under the soft light, reflecting the oranges and purples of the sunset. Everything seemed more vivid now, the colors richer, the sounds sharper, as if the world itself had decided to reward him for his patience and respect. The desert could be harsh and unforgiving, but at this moment, it felt alive in a gentle, almost magical way. He crouched near the water, noticing how the rocks were warmed by the sun and how the cool water ran around them in tiny eddies. The air smelled of wet earth, sage, and the faint perfume of wild flowers that had survived the dry heat. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the place fill him completely. There were no distractions, no noise from distant towns or other travelers, only the soft rustle of leaves, the trickle of the creek, and the occasional call of a distant bird. He realized that these rare moments of stillness were what made life on the trail bearable and even meaningful. As he opened his eyes, he thought once more about the women. He wondered what their lives were like, their daily routines, their families, the stories they carried. They moved through the creek with such confidence, so familiar with every stone and ripple of the water. Caleb could sense a deep connection they had with the land, a knowledge that could only come from years of living in harmony with the wilderness. It was a kind of wisdom he had never truly known, and it humbled him. He felt fortunate just to witness it, to see a glimpse of life lived fully and freely in a world that often demanded only survival. Caleb's gaze drifted to the shadows near the trees. Movement caught his eye, subtle but unmistakable. One of the women had emerged from behind the willow, stepping carefully over the rocks. She paused, glancing briefly in Caleb's direction. Their eyes met once more, and for a heartbeat time seemed to slow. There was no fear in her gaze, no accusation, only acknowledgement, a quiet, mutual recognition of each other's presence. Caleb felt a wave of emotions, awe, respect, and a deep, almost spiritual connection that words could never capture. He remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb the fragile moment. The woman nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle it could have been missed, and then she turned back toward her companions, who were hidden behind the reeds. Caleb realized that this was the true climax of the encounter, not a dramatic event or confrontation, but the emotional intensity of a silent understanding between two people from very different worlds. It was a connection that needed no explanation, no conversation, yet it spoke volumes. As the woman disappeared from view, Caleb felt a mixture of relief and longing. Relief because he had not intruded. Longing because he wanted to understand more, to learn more, to experience more of this quiet, beautiful life. But he knew he could not follow. Respect demanded that he remain an observer, a witness to a fleeting moment that was never meant to be fully shared. The creek, the women, the desert itself, all of it was a delicate balance, and he was a temporary visitor in their world. He sank down onto a sun-warmed rock, letting his thoughts drift. The emotional intensity of the encounter left him both exhilarated and contemplative. Caleb realized that life on the trail had often left him numb, focused on survival rather than observation. Days and weeks had passed in a blur of heat, dust, and work, with little time for reflection or wonder. But now, he felt more alive than he had in years. The creek, the sunlight, the movement of water and wind, and the silent grace of the women had awakened something in him. It was a reminder that beauty existed even in the harshest landscapes, and that respect and patience could unlock moments of profound meaning. Caleb's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on his own life choices. He had spent so many years chasing cattle, moving from one dusty town to another, always searching for the next trail, the next herd, the next task. He had rarely paused to appreciate the small, extraordinary moments that could make life richer and deeper. Watching the women at the creek, even from a distance, had reminded him that life was not just about survival or work. It was about awareness, understanding, and the quiet joys that could be found in the natural world. The sky continued to shift, the sun sinking lower, casting long, delicate shadows across the creek. The colors deepened into oranges, pinks, and purples, reflecting on the water like a painting. Caleb felt a sudden clarity, as if the desert itself was speaking to him. He understood that this was a rare and precious experience, a moment that could not be repeated or forced. He felt gratitude, a deep sense of honor for being allowed to witness the beauty of life without disturbing it. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and the fleeting nature of extraordinary moments. He noticed the gentle rustling of leaves behind him and glanced over his shoulder. Dusty had shifted slightly, her ears twitching to catch the sounds of the desert. Caleb smiled softly, realizing that even his companion had shared in the serenity of the place. The bond between a cowboy and his horse was strong, built on trust and shared experience, and in this moment he felt that bond more keenly than ever. Dusty had carried him safely to this hidden corner of the desert, allowing him to witness a scene that would remain in his memory forever. Caleb's mind wandered back to the subtle gestures of the women, the way they moved with ease, the unspoken communication between them, and the quiet strength they exhibited left a lasting impression. It was a type of grace he had rarely encountered, something beyond mere beauty or charm. It was power tempered by gentleness, knowledge tempered by humility. He understood that the desert had shaped them, just as it had shaped him, but in very different ways. Their lives were intertwined with the land in a deep, almost spiritual way, and it was impossible not to admire it. As twilight approached, the creek seemed to glow in the fading light, the water reflecting the sky's brilliant colors. Caleb took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over him. The emotional intensity of the encounter, the silent connection he had felt, and the beauty of the natural world combined into a moment of perfect clarity. It was a reminder that life could be extraordinary even in its quietest, simplest forms. He felt fortunate, humbled, and inspired all at once. Finally, Caleb knew it was time to leave. He gently untied Dusty and mounted her, moving carefully along the edge of the creek. Every step was deliberate, every glance intentional. He did not want to leave, yet he understood that the true value of the encounter lay in its fleeting nature. Moments like this were rare and precious precisely because they could not be held onto or controlled. They existed in the delicate balance between presence and absence, observation and intrusion. As they rode away, Caleb looked back one last time. The creek shimmered in the twilight, the reeds swayed gently, and the trees cast long, graceful shadows over the water. The women were gone, moving further along the creek or perhaps returning to their homes. Caleb felt a quiet joy, a sense of completion, and a deep respect for what he had witnessed. This emotional climax, this subtle connection, would remain with him forever, a secret treasure etched into his memory, a reminder of the beauty, power, and quiet magic of the West. By the time they reached the wider expanse of the desert, the sun had disappeared behind the distant mountains, leaving a soft purple glow in the sky. Caleb rode slowly, savoring the peace that lingered in the air. The day had been extraordinary, not because of danger or adventure, but because of the rare and profound human experience he had shared, even silently, with people who lived in harmony with the land. He understood now that some moments could not be measured by action or achievement, but by feeling, understanding, and respect. As night began to settle over the desert, the stars emerging one by one in the clear, vast sky, Caleb felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had witnessed life as it was meant to be seen, pure, unguarded, and beautiful. The encounter with the women, the silent connection, and the lessons of patience, respect, and observation would remain with him forever. In the quiet of the desert night, he felt a sense of peace, unlike any he had known, a knowledge that even in the wild, untamed West, moments of extraordinary grace could be found. The desert night settled slowly over the canyon, blanketing the land in deep shades of blue and purple. The stars appeared, one by one, sparkling like tiny lanterns hung in the endless sky. A soft wind whispered through the trees and reeds along the creek, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. Caleb guided Dusty carefully along the trail, moving away from the hidden creek where the women had bathed. Even as he put distance between himself and that secluded corner, the memory of the scene remained vivid in his mind. He could still hear their soft laughter mingling with the sound of the flowing water, and he could still see the way the sunlight had danced across the creek and the reeds. Caleb felt a mixture of calm and wonder. He had spent many years traveling the deserts and mountains of the West, witnessing countless sunrises and sunsets, but this day had been unlike any other. The encounter with the women had left a mark on him, a quiet but profound impression that he could not shake. Even though the moment had been brief and distant, it had stirred something inside him, a deeper understanding of life, respect, and the beauty that could be found in unexpected places. He thought about how rare it was to witness something so pure and unguarded. On the trail, most encounters were fleeting, practical or transactional. Cowboys meeting for trade, ranchers discussing herds, travelers passing through towns. But this had been different. It had been personal, yet entirely private. He had not spoken to the women, and they had not spoken to him, yet there had been communication, understanding, and a shared acknowledgement of presence. It was a subtle, silent connection, more profound than words could express. Caleb realized that life sometimes offered these extraordinary moments to those patient and respectful enough to notice. As he rode on, he reflected on the lessons the day had taught him. He had learned that respect for others, even strangers, was more valuable than curiosity unchecked. He had learned that patience could reveal hidden beauty, and that observing life without interference could be as meaningful as participating in it. He had been reminded of the quiet strength and wisdom that could be found in people who lived in harmony with the land, and he felt grateful for the chance to witness it. The desert around him was quiet now, the only sounds coming from Dusty's hooves on the sandy trail, the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Caleb felt connected to the world in a way he rarely did. He thought about his own life on the trail, the long days, the dust, the solitude, and realized that he had often overlooked the small, extraordinary moments in favor of survival and routine. But now he understood that life's true richness could be found in attention, observation, and respect for the world and its people. As the night deepened, Caleb reached a small plateau overlooking the creek valley. He stopped Dusty and gazed down at the water far below. The moon had begun to rise, casting a silver glow over the creek and the surrounding trees. He imagined the women moving along the banks, perhaps returning home, their lives continuing in the rhythms of the desert. Caleb felt a sense of reverence for their resilience, their freedom, and the knowledge they carried of the land. They had lived here in harmony with the world, and their presence had reminded him of the quiet, profound beauty that life could hold. For a long while, Caleb simply sat on his horse, letting the night and the memory of the day sink into him. He thought about the fleeting nature of moments, the way a single encounter could leave a lasting impression on a life. He realized that the true meaning of the day was not in what he had done, but in what he had witnessed and how it had changed him. He felt calmer, wiser, and more aware of the world around him. He understood that some experiences were meant to be remembered, treasured, and carried silently, without ever being shared aloud. As he began to ride again, Caleb's thoughts turned inward. He remembered how he had watched the women at the creek, their laughter, their ease with the land, and the quiet confidence they carried. He thought about the unspoken connection they had shared, and how it had made him feel both humbled and inspired. He understood now that life's most important lessons were often found in subtle moments, in the quiet interactions, and in the respect one showed for others. Caleb continued along the desert trail, the stars bright above him, guiding him like tiny points of hope. The wind was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the creek, as if the land itself was reminding him of the encounter. He thought about how easily such moments could be missed, lost in the rush of daily life, and he felt fortunate to have been present. The day had changed him, not in dramatic ways, but in the deep, quiet ways that matter most, shaping his thoughts, his feelings, and his respect for life. As the moon rose higher, casting silver shadows across the rocks and sand, Caleb thought about his own journey. He realized that life on the trail was more than herds and work, more than travel and survival. It was also about noticing, appreciating, and honoring the small, extraordinary moments that appeared unexpectedly. He felt grateful for the creek, for the women, and for the wisdom that the desert had offered him. Every detail, the flowing water, the reeds, the willows, and the silent gestures, was etched into his memory like a treasure. By the time Caleb reached the edge of the canyon, the sky was deep blue, and the first hints of dawn were still hours away. Dusty's pace was steady and calm, her trust in him evident in the way she moved. Caleb patted her neck, feeling a quiet sense of partnership and companionship. He understood that the trail, the land, and his horse had all played a part in the day's extraordinary experience. Without patience, awareness, and respect, he would never have witnessed the beauty of the creek or the women's presence. Caleb reflected on how this encounter would shape his future. He knew he would carry the memory with him, returning to it whenever the trail felt lonely or the days felt difficult. The image of the creek, the shimmering water, and the women moving gracefully through the reeds would remain vivid in his mind. It would remind him of the importance of patience, respect, and observation. It would remind him that the West was not just a land of hardship, but a place of hidden beauty and extraordinary moments. He also understood that the encounter had taught him something about himself. He had felt a deeper sense of empathy, a greater appreciation for people who live differently from him, and a stronger connection to the land. The subtle emotional climax of the day, the silent connection with the woman he had glimpsed, had changed him in ways he could not fully explain. It had given him insight, humility, and a quiet joy that he would carry forever. As he rode further from the creek, Caleb allowed himself one last glance over the canyon. The moonlight shimmered on the water far below, and he imagined the women moving along the banks, their lives continuing in harmony with the land. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for being able to witness such a rare and private moment. He understood that this was a memory he would never share with anyone, but it would remain a guiding light in his life, reminding him to approach the world with respect, patience, and awareness. The desert stretched endlessly around him, silent and vast, yet filled with life in its own subtle way. Caleb felt a sense of completion, knowing that the encounter had been meaningful and transformative. He had witnessed a fleeting moment of grace, beauty, and human connection, and he had honored it by remaining a careful observer. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the most profound experiences in life are the ones that require restraint, respect, and patience, and they are treasured all the more for their quiet, fleeting nature. As the night deepened, Caleb and Dusty moved steadily along the trail, guided by the stars and the soft light of the moon. He reflected on how extraordinary the day had been, not for adventure, danger, or excitement, but for the rare and subtle beauty he had witnessed. He understood now that such moments were what made life meaningful, and that respecting them was as important as experiencing them. The creek, the women, and the desert itself would remain in his mind a private treasure that no one else could touch. By the time Caleb finally reached a familiar clearing suitable for setting camp, the night was fully settled, cool and quiet. He fed Dusty, letting her drink from a nearby stream, and then prepared a small fire.